The forest was silent except for the sound of leaves moving in the night wind. Jack walked carefully, his boots making soft crunches on the damp ground. He was far from any human settlement, exploring the alien world for rare plants and minerals. The moon above was large and pale, lighting the path just enough for him to see. He carried a small pack on his back and a flashlight in his hand. It had been a long day, and he was thinking about setting up camp when he heard it. A cry. Not the cry of a bird, not the howl of a beast, but something small, broken, and full of fear. Jack froze. The sound came again, softer this time, like a whimper. He turned his head and followed the noise. Pushing through the thick bushes, each step took him deeper into the shadows, where the moonlight could not reach. There in the middle of a small clearing lay a tiny creature. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was a dragon, not the giant. Fire-breathing monsters from human stories. But a baby, no bigger than a house cat. Its scales were dull, as if the shine had been taken away by hunger and cold. Its small wings were torn, and one leg was bleeding. The little dragon's chest moved fast, its golden eyes wide with terror. Jack slowly knelt. He had heard stories about dragons on this planet. They were strong, dangerous, and fiercely protective of their young. But here was one, all alone, shivering and too weak to move. "Where's your family?" Jack whispered, even though he knew the baby could not answer. The dragon flinched at his voice, pressing itself against the ground as if expecting a blow. Jack looked around the clearing. The air felt heavy, as if something had just passed through. The ground showed claw marks, and broken branches hinted at a fight. There was no sign of other dragons, only the smell of blood and fear. Whatever happened here, it had left this little one behind. The baby made another small sound, a weak, pitiful chirp. Jack's heart tightened. He knew he should walk away. A wounded dragon could attract predators, and helping it might mean trouble. But he also knew that if he left now, the baby would not survive the night. Then a sudden rustle from the trees. Jack's instincts flared something. Was watching. He turned his flashlight toward the sound. Two glowing eyes stared back at him from the darkness. The shape was large, low to the ground, and moving slowly. It was a predator, drawn by the baby's cries. Jack stepped in front of the dragon. He held up his flashlight in one hand and his knife in the other. The predator hissed, its sharp teeth flashing in the dim light. Jack knew he could not fight it head-on. Instead, he grabbed a small rock and threw it hard, hitting a nearby tree. The noise startled the creature, but it didn't run. It circled closer, its claws scraping the dirt. The baby dragon whimpered again. Jack's mind raced. He could not protect them both out here. He had to move. Bending down, he scooped the tiny dragon into his arms, feeling how light and fragile it was. The creature made a weak attempt to resist, but soon went still. Jack turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth. The predator followed, snapping branches behind them. Jack didn't stop until he found a fallen tree with a hollow under its roots. He slid inside, clutching the dragon close. The predator's footsteps slowed. Passing by without finding them, Jack stayed still, his heart pounding in his ears. After a long moment, the forest went quiet again. The baby dragon trembled against him. Jack looked down at it, its eyes half closed. "You're safe now," he whispered. The dragon made a tiny sound and pressed its head against his chest. Jack felt something strange, then not fear, but a connection. This creature didn't see him as a threat anymore. It saw him as something else, maybe hope. But deep down, Jack knew the danger was not over. The predator would come back, and other creatures might follow the scent of blood if the baby stayed out here. It would die. Jack sighed, pulling his jacket tighter. Around the small body, he had just made a choice without even thinking about it. He was not going to leave this dragon behind, no matter the risk. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying distant sounds. Something else was out there, something bigger than the predator. And Jack had the uneasy feeling that whatever had driven this baby from its parents might still be close. But for now, he focused on keeping the little one alive until morning. And as the baby dragon's breathing slowed in his arms, Jack whispered, "A promise into the cold night air. I've got you." The first light of dawn crept into the forest, turning the mist into a silver haze. Jack had barely slept. He sat with his back against the hollow tree. The baby dragon curled in his lap. Its small body was warm, and every so often, it twitched in its sleep. Jack's knife lay by his side, his eyes scanning the trees for movement. The night had been too close for comfort. That predator had nearly caught them. And Jack knew it wasn't the only danger out here. This planet was full of creatures that would see the baby dragon as an easy meal. He looked down at the tiny thing, wondering why its parents had left it. Maybe they'd been killed. Maybe they'd abandoned it because it was weak. Either way, it had no one now except him. The baby stirred. Letting out a soft, broken sound, Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a small packet of dried meat. He tore off a thin piece and held it near the dragon's mouth. At first, it turned its head away, but when Jack touched the food to its lips, it took a cautious bite, then another and another. Jack smiled. A small victory in the middle of this mess. His smile faded when he heard its footsteps, not the quiet steps of an animal, but heavy, deliberate ones. Jack tensed, moving the dragon behind him. Voices followed, low and sharp, speaking in an alien tongue. He recognized a few words from his time trading on the spaceport. They were hunters, and they were looking for something. Jack pressed himself deeper into the hollow, holding the dragon close. The voices grew louder, and one of the hunters laughed. He spoke in broken human language. Dragon. Baby. Worth. Gold. Jack's stomach tightened. So that was it. They weren't here for food. They were here to capture and sell the hatchling. The hunters moved closer. Jack's hand found his knife, but he knew it would be useless against more than one. Of them, the baby dragon trembled, its golden eyes wide with fear. If it cried out now, they'd be discovered. Jack stroked its head gently, whispering for it to stay quiet. The footsteps stopped right outside the hollow. For a moment, the only sound was breathing. Then, Atay's face appeared through the gap. His skin was pale and marked with deep scars, his eyes cold and calculating. Jack froze. The hunter's gaze dropped to the small bundle in Jack's arms. "Ha!" and his lips twisted into a greedy smile. "Give," the hunter said, holding out his clawed hand. Jack shook his head. His grip on the dragon tightening, the hunter snarled and reached inside. Jack acted fast, slashing with his knife, forcing the hunter to pull back with a hiss. Shouts erupted as the other hunters rushed forward. Jack didn't wait. He crawled out the other side of the hollow, clutching the dragon and running. Branches whipped against his face, roots caught his boots, but he didn't stop. The hunters were right behind him, their voices echoing through the forest. Jack's lungs burned, but his legs kept moving. Ahead, he spotted a narrow path between two giant rocks. If he could reach it, maybe he could lose them in the cliffs. Beyond, he pushed himself harder, the dragon clinging to his chest. A sharp cry from behind told him the hunters were closing the gap. Jack dove into the rocky passage. Scraping his shoulder but not slowing, the path twisted sharply. And suddenly, he was in a small canyon, the walls high and steep. He spotted a fallen log across a stream and dashed toward it, crossing the stream. He ducked under the log, pressing himself against the mud. The hunters reached the canyon moments. Later, Jack watched them from his hiding place as they scanned the area, confused. One of them growled and kicked a rock. Then they turned back the way they came. Jack waited until their footsteps faded before letting out a long breath. The baby dragon made a soft chirp, tilting its head at him. Jack looked at it and shook his head with a tired smile. "You're trouble. You know that?" he whispered. The dragon blinked slowly, then pressed its head against his chest again. Jack felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Responsibility he could leave now, head back to the human outpost, and pretend none of this had happened. It would be the safest choice. But when he thought of the hunters, the predators, and the cold nights ahead, he knew the baby wouldn't survive without him. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, little one," he said quietly. "I guess we're sticking together." The decision was made. From now on, wherever Jack went, the dragon would go too, and he had a feeling their journey was only just beginning. The morning sun broke through the forest canopy, spilling golden light over the damp ground. Jack sat on a flat rock beside a small fire, roasting strips of meat on a sharpened stick. The baby dragon sat across from him, its head tilted, watching the food with unblinking eyes. It had eaten very little since they met, but Jack was patient. He knew trust took time. He had learned that lesson with wild animals before, but this was different. This was no ordinary creature. The dragon shifted its wings awkwardly, and Jack noticed again how torn and weak they looked. A deep bite mark ran along the right wing, the edges still red and raw. He frowned, knowing it needed treatment or the wound could turn deadly. Slowly, he took a small jar from his pack, filled with healing salve he had made from local herbs. When he opened it, the dragon hissed softly, its eyes narrowing. "It's all right," Jack murmured, holding out his hand so it could smell the salve. The dragon sniffed, then looked at him, uncertain. Jack moved closer, kneeling down, every muscle in the dragon's small body tensed. But it didn't back away. He dipped his fingers into the salve and gently touched the wound. The dragon flinched, but didn't pull away. Jack worked slowly, speaking in a calm, low voice. "There you go. Just a little more. This will help." By the time he finished, the dragon's breathing had slowed and its eyes had softened. That was the first moment Jack felt it's the fragile thread of trust between them. Later, Jack decided to check the area for food and water. He motioned for the dragon to stay, but it immediately followed him. Where he stepped, it stepped. Where he stopped, it stopped. He chuckled under his breath. "Looks like I've got a shadow now." They found a small pond not far from their camp. Jack filled his canteen while the dragon leaned down to drink, its small tongue flicking over the water, when a buzzing insect landed nearby. The dragon snapped it up with surprising speed. Jack grinned. "Guess you're not completely helpless." As the day went on, Jack noticed the dragon starting to mimic him. When he crouched to inspect a plant, it crouched too. When he turned his head, it turned its head the same way. It was almost playful, but also curious. It was learning from him that night. When they settled by the fire again, the dragon crept closer on its own. Instead of keeping distance, it curled up beside his leg. Jack hesitated for a moment, then reached down and stroked the scales on its back. They were cool to the touch. Smooth in some places and rough where the wounds were healing, the dragon closed its eyes, letting out a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a low hum. But the peace didn't last long. A loud screech echoed through the trees. Sharp and hungry, Jack looked up just in time to see a massive, bird-like predator swooping down from above. Its talons were outstretched, aiming straight for the dragon. Jack grabbed the baby and rolled away just as the predator struck the ground where they'd been sitting. The impact shook the dirt, sending sparks from the fire into the air. Jack scrambled to his feet, keeping the dragon shielded in his arms. The predator screeched again, flapping its huge wings to launch another attack. Jack knew he couldn't fight it head-on. He spotted a narrow gap between two boulders and sprinted toward it. The predator dove after them, its wings beating the air with a deafening rush. Jack slid into the gap, Pressing his back against one rock and holding the dragon tight, the predator slammed against the entrance. Its beak snapping, but it couldn't reach them. It let out a frustrated cry before finally flying off into the sky. Jack stayed still for several minutes, listening when he was sure it was gone. He looked down at the dragon. Its small body trembled, but its eyes were locked on his face. "You're safe," Jack whispered, his voice steady. The dragon blinked slowly and then did something unexpected, reached its small snout forward and touched his chin. It was a brief, soft gesture, but Jack understood it. The dragon trusted him now. Truly and completely. That night, Jack didn't have to call it over to the fire. The dragon walked to him on its own, curled up against his side, and let out a soft rumble before falling asleep. Jack stared into the flames, knowing the bond between them was now unbreakable. But he also knew this world wouldn't let them live in peace for long. Somewhere out there, more predators waited. And worse, the hunters he had escaped from would not give up so easily. Jack had protected the dragon twice now, but in his gut, he knew the next danger would be far greater. And when it came, both of them would have to fight. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the forest. Jack walked quietly, the baby dragon trotting beside him. Its wounds were healing, and it moved with more energy now, its tail flicking behind it. Jack carried a small bundle of supplies on his back, scanning the trees for signs of danger. They had been moving for hours, heading toward the distant hills where Jack thought they might find safer ground. The air was cooler here, and the sound of running water reached his ears. He led them toward a narrow stream, letting the dragon drink its fill. As the creature lapped at the water, Jack crouched down, washing his hands and face. He almost missed the faint crunch of leaves behind them. Almost. Jack froze. The baby dragon lifted its head, its golden eyes narrowing. The sound came again, footsteps. Slow and careful, not the heavy crash of an animal, but the deliberate tread of something hunting. Jack's instinct screamed at him. He stood slowly, placing himself between the noise and the dragon. Voices followed, low and sharp, carried on the wind. Jack's heart sank as he recognized them. The hunters, the same ones from before. They had found them again. He grabbed the dragon gently but firmly, tucking it against his side. The voices grew louder, and then shapes emerged from the trees. 3 of them, tall and lean, their pale skin marked with dark scars. They carried long rifles and nets made of metal threads that glinted in the fading light. Their leader stepped forward, his eyes cold and fixed on the dragon. "Human," the leader said, his voice harsh. "Give it." Jack shook his head, his grip tightening on the small creature. The leader's lips curled into a thin smile. "Worth much. You die for it." Jack didn't answer. The hunters spread out, blocking the path ahead and behind. Jack glanced to the side, spotting a narrow gap between 2 large tree trunks. It might be their only chance. "Run," Jack whispered to the dragon. Though he knew it wouldn't leave him then, without warning, he lunged toward the gap. The hunters shouted, firing their nets. One flew past his shoulder, another tangled in a branch. Jack ducked and rolled. Clutching the dragon tight, he broke through the gap and ran downhill, branches snapping under his boots. The forest blurred around him as he sprinted. Behind, the hunters crashed through the undergrowth, shouting in their guttural tongue. A shot rang out, a net whistling past his head and slamming into a tree. Jack didn't slow, weaving between trees and leaping over fallen logs. The baby dragon pressed close against his chest, silent but trembling. The ground leveled out, and Jack spotted a cluster of massive roots forming a hollow. He ducked inside, crouching low and listening. The hunter's footsteps thundered past, fading for a moment before circling back. They were searching, moving methodically. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at the dragon and placed a finger to his lips. It stayed still, its eyes locked on his. Minutes dragged on like hours. Then, a shadow fell over the hollow. One of the hunters was standing right above them. Jack held his breath, his hand tightening around the hilt of his knife. The hunter's head tilted, as if listening. A small twig snapped under Jack's boot. The hunter's eyes narrowed, and he reached down. Before Jack could react, a sharp hiss filled the air. The baby dragon, sensing danger, let out a sudden burst of heat, not a full flame, but enough to scorch the hunter's hand. The man roared in pain, jerking back. Jack seized the moment, bursting from the hollow and shoving the hunter aside. He ran, the dragon clinging to his shirt. The other two hunters shouted and gave chase. The forest grew darker as the sun sank, making it harder to see. Jack used the shadows to his advantage, zigzagging through the trees. Finally, he spotted a steep slope ahead. Without hesitation, he slid down it, dirt and rocks tumbling under his feet. At the bottom, he found a narrow cave entrance hidden by vines. He slipped inside, pulling the vines back into place. Inside, the cave was cool and damp. Jack sank to the ground, breathing hard. The dragon crawled into his lap, curling against him. He stroked its head, whispering, "You saved us." The dragon made a low rumble, its small body relaxing against his. Jack knew the hunters wouldn't give up. They had seen the dragon's fire. They would be more determined than ever now. But for tonight, they were hidden, and Jack would stay awake, knife in hand, guarding the small life that had come to trust him completely. The cave was still dark when Jack finally allowed himself to rest. The faint sound of dripping water echoed off the stone walls. The baby dragon lay beside him, its sides rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Jack kept his hand resting on its back, feeling the warmth that seemed to come from deep inside it. It was a comfort in the cold underground air. But Jack's mind refused to relax completely. He kept replaying the events of the Datha hunters, the chase, the near capture. They had been too close, far too close, if not for the dragons. Sudden burst of heat, they would both be in chains right now. Jack glanced at the little creature, wondering just how much power it truly had. It was still so small, still weak from its injuries. But there was something inside it that was growing. As morning light filtered faintly through the vines at the cave's entrance, Jack stood and stretched. He knew they couldn't stay here. The hunters would search every hiding place, and eventually they would find this one. He packed up what little he had, then crouched down in front of the dragon. "Come on, little one," he said quietly. "We need to move." The dragon chirped softly, hopping onto his shoulder, its tiny claws gripping his jacket. They made their way through the forest, staying close to the thicker shadows. Every sound made Jack tense: the snap of a twig, the flutter of wings, even the rustle of leaves in the wind. The dragon stayed close, its gaze constantly moving, almost as if it sensed danger before Jack did. By midday, they reached a rocky ridge that offered a wide view of the valley below. Jack scanned the area, looking for signs of movement. What he saw made his stomach twist. 3 hunters were moving through the valley, their long rifles slung over their backs. They were tracking something. Jack knew immediately it was them. The lead hunter stopped, crouching to touch the ground where Jack had passed days before. Even from this distance, Jack could feel the threat in their slow, deliberate movements. They were patient, relentless, and they were closing in. Jack backed away from the ridge, keeping low. But before they could get far, a sharp whistle pierced the air. It wasn't a bird, it was a signal from the trees behind them. Another group of hunters stepped out, blocking their escape. Jack's heart pounded as he realized they were surrounded. The hunters moved in slowly, confident now. Their leader pointed at the dragon and spoke in his broken human tongue. Nowhere to run. Give or die. Jack tightened his grip on the creature. His jaw set. Not happening. He said under his breath. One of the hunters lunged forward, swinging his net. Jack dodged. But another stepped in from the side, cutting him off. Net flew through the air, and this time Jack couldn't avoid it completely. The weighted edge caught his arm, tangling around his pack. The hunters shouted in victory. Moving closer, the dragon's eyes widened, its body tensing against Jack's chest. Jack felt heat building through the creature's small frame. He barely had time to react before it happened. A roar small but fierce erupted from the dragon's throat. Then, in an instant, a jet of fire shot from its mouth. The flames lit the air, bright and blinding. The nearest hunter screamed, stumbling back as his arm caught fire. The others shouted in shock, their careful approach breaking into chaos. Jack tore the net off and grabbed the dragon, sprinting through the sudden gap in their line. The hunters fired after them, but the bolts hit trees and rocks instead. Jack didn't look back, he just ran. Branches whipped at his face, and the heat from the dragon's fire still lingered against his chest. They reached a narrow stream and splashed across it, hoping to throw off their scent. Finally, after what felt like forever, Jack slowed, his lungs burning. He ducked under a large overhang of rock, collapsing to his knees. The dragon climbed down from his arms, its tiny chest still heaving from the effort. Jack stared at it, amazed. That was incredible, he said, his voice low. The dragon tilted its head as if it didn't understand, but its eyes were brighter now. It had discovered something about itself, something powerful. Jack reached out and stroked its head, feeling the faint warmth beneath its scales, but even as relief washed over him, Jack knew this changed everything. The hunters had seen the fire. Now they would know exactly what kind of prize they were chasing. They wouldn't stop until they had it tore. Until Jack stopped them, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. If the dragon was going to survive, it would have to learn to use that power again, and next time, it wouldn't just be in defense. As the sun dipped low, Jack began planning their next move. The world around them was growing more dangerous by the hour, but he wasn't about to give up. Not when the little creature beside him had finally found its flame. The night after the fire attack was cold and restless. Jack sat by a small, hidden fire, the flames low to avoid drawing attention. The baby dragon was curled up beside him, its head resting on his knee. Its breathing was slow now, but Jack could tell it was tired from using its flame. He gently stroked the top of its head, feeling the soft vibrations of its quiet purr. The forest was silent except for the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. Jack's eyes kept scanning the darkness, knowing the hunters were still out there. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps approaching. They were running out of safe places to hide. And the baby dragon was growing more valuable to the wrong kind of people every day. Earlier that evening, Jack had overheard something while sneaking past an abandoned outpost. He caught fragments of a conversation over a radio. A trader's voice mentioned a sanctuary far to the north, a hidden valley where rare and endangered creatures were protected from hunters. It was heavily guarded, almost impossible to reach without the right contacts. But if they could make it there, the dragon would finally be safe. Jack stared into the flames, thinking about the journey. It would take weeks to reach that valley. The path was full of predators, rough terrain, and likely more hunters. He could turn back now, head toward the human colony, and end this. But if he did, the dragon's fate would be sealed. There was no safety for it anywhere else. The little creature stirred, lifting its head to look at him. Its golden eyes reflected the firelight. Warm and trusting, it didn't know about the dangers ahead. It only knew that Jack had kept it safe. So far, and in that look, Jack felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "All right, little one," he whispered. "We'll go north." The dragon blinked slowly, as if it understood. Jack smiled faintly. Though his chest felt heavy with the risk, this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about keeping a promise he hadn't even spoken aloud. The next morning, they set out early. The sun was hidden behind clouds, and the air carried the scent of rain. Jack moved quickly, keeping to higher ground where he could see farther. The dragon followed close, sometimes running ahead, sometimes riding on his shoulder. They passed through dense forests, crossed streams, and climbed rocky hills. But the further north they went, the more signs they saw of the hunter's presence. At midday, Jack spotted fresh tracks, boot prints, deep and deliberate. He crouched, touching the damp earth. They weren't far behind. The dragon sniffed the air, letting out a low hiss. Jack gently hushed it, leading them off the main path into thicker brush. By nightfall, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls steep and close. It seemed like a good place to rest. But Jack didn't like the way the sound echoed here. Still, they needed to stop. He built a small fire inside a sheltered alcove and shared dried meat with the dragon. It ate more than usual, its strength slowly returning when they finished. The dragon curled up against him, drifting into sleep. That's when Jack heard a faint scraping sound from the canyon entrance. He froze. It came again, louder this time, followed by a harsh, guttural voice. Jack grabbed his pack and nudged the dragon awake. Its eyes snapped open, alert. The hunters had found them. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised. Jack stepped in front of the dragon, his knife in one hand. The leader snarled, "No more running, human." "It comes with us." Jack's heart pounded. The canyon walls trapped them in. There was nowhere to flee. One hunter moved forward, net in hand. The dragon growled a deep, rumbling sound Jack hadn't heard before. It stepped out from behind him, its wings flaring despite the torn edges. The hunter hesitated, but then lunged. The dragon opened its mouth, fire building in its throat. Jack shouted, "Now!" A burst of flame roared into the narrow canyon. The heat was intense, forcing the hunters back. Jack grabbed the dragon and ran toward the far end of the canyon. He spotted a narrow crack in the rock, just big enough for them to squeeze through. They slipped inside, scraping against the stone, and emerged into the open forest beyond. They didn't stop running until the sound of the hunter's shouts was gone. Jack leaned against a tree, catching his breath. The dragon looked up at him, its eyes fierce and bright. Jack knelt down, placing a hand on its head. "We keep going," he said, "all the way to that sanctuary." The dragon rumbled softly. Pressing against him, the choice was made. There was no turning back now. And Jack knew that every step north would be a fight for both their lives. The journey north had taken its toll on both of them. Jack's clothes were torn, his boots worn thin, and his muscles ached from days of travel without proper rest. The baby dragon, though stronger now, carried faint scars on its wings and legs. But its eyes burned brighter than ever, filled with a fire Jack had not seen when they first met. They were close now. Jack could feel it. Ahead, the forest began to thin, giving way to rolling hills. Beyond those hills was the hidden valley he had heard about. The sanctuary. It felt unreal that after so much running, so many close calls, they were almost there. But Jack also knew that the closer they got, the more dangerous it would become. The hunters would not let them escape so easily. They reached the crest of a hill just as the sun began to rise. The golden light spilled across the land, and in the distance, Jack saw it, a narrow break between 2 mountains, glowing faintly with mist. That had to be the entrance to the sanctuary. The dragon stood beside him, its tail curling slowly. It seemed to sense the importance of this moment. But then the sound came sharp, echoing, and all too familiar, the hunters' whistles. Jack's stomach tightened. From the tree line behind them, figures emerged, for hunters this time. Armed with nets and rifles, their faces set in grim determination, the leader pointed at the dragon and barked an order. They began to spread out, cutting off every path except forward. Jack knew they had to reach that mountain pass before the hunters closed in. "Run," he whispered, and they both launched forward down the slope. The ground was uneven, rocks and roots threatening to trip them. The hunters gave chase. Their boots pounding the earth, a net whistled through the air. Missing Jack's head by inches, another slammed into the ground beside them, the weighted edge tangling in the grass. The dragon leaped onto Jack's shoulder. Holding tight as he weaved through the obstacles, its small claws dug into his jacket. But Jack didn't slow. The gap between the mountains grew closer, the mist swirling like a living thing. He could almost feel safety just beyond it. But the hunters were gaining ground. A sudden shot rang out and something grazed Jack's arm. He stumbled but kept running. The dragon growled, twisting around to face their pursuers. Jack felt heat build against his neck. Then, without warning, the dragon launched itself from his shoulder, landing on the ground between Jack and the hunters. Jack turned, startled. The dragon stood with its wings spread wide, small but fierce. Its golden eyes locked on the hunters. Fire flickered in its throat, brighter than before. The hunters hesitated, unsure if they should advance. Then the leader snarled and stepped forward. Raising his rifle, the dragon roared a sound far larger than its size should allow. Flames burst from its mouth in a sweeping arc. The air shimmered with heat as the fire forced the hunters back. One dropped his weapon, another stumbled and fell. Jack seized the chance, running to the dragon and scooping it into his arms. "Good work, little one. Now let's finish this," he said. They sprinted for the mountain pass, the hunters still shouting behind them. The ground grew steeper, rocks slipping under Jack's boots. His lungs burned, every muscle in his body screaming. But the thought of stopping never crossed his mind. The mist grew thicker, cool against his skin. And then, suddenly, shapes appeared ahead, tall gates carved into the rock, guarded by figures. In heavy armor, the sanctuary guards stepped forward, their weapons raised. Jack shouted, "Help us." They're after the dragon. The guard's eyes went to the small creature in his arms, and then to the hunters charging up the slope. Without hesitation, they formed a wall. The hunters skidded to a halt, realizing they could not pass. The leader shouted something in frustration. But the guards didn't move. Instead, they motioned for Jack to come through. Jack stepped into the cool shadow of the gates. The dragon still pressed to his chest the moment they crossed the threshold. Jack felt the tension in his shoulders ease. They were safe. The gates closed behind them with a heavy thud, sealing out the hunters' shouts. Inside, the valley was breathtaking: green fields, crystal streams, and cliffs that rose high into the clouds. Dragons of all sizes flew overhead, their wings casting huge shadows on the ground. The baby dragon wriggled free from Jack's arms and stared in wide-eyed wonder. It let out a joyful cry, answered by a distant call from the sky. Jack watched as it spread its wings and flapped them, stronger than he had ever seen. It turned to look back at him, its golden eyes full of gratitude. Then it ran toward a group of larger dragons who lowered their heads in welcome. Jack felt a pang of sadness at the thought of letting it go, but when the dragon paused, looking back at him once more, Jack understood it wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of something greater. The little dragon took flight for the first time, its wings catching the wind. It circled high above the valley before diving back down toward him, landing gently at his side. Jack smiled, placing a hand on its neck. "You're home now?" he whispered. The dragon rumbled softly, leaning into his touch, and as the sun broke over the sanctuary, Jack knew that no matter where life took them next, they would always have this bond unshakable. Unbreakable, they had escaped the hunters, crossed the wilds, and found freedom together.